Hey everyone, welcome to the week of October 5th through 9th. This week we are going to be starting a new GED learning skill. So we're going to be practicing a new reading skill. We are going to be practicing the skill of sequence. So what you're going to want to do is make sure you have a pen or pencil, some paper, and your notebook. And you're also going to want to make sure you have your welcome packet with you because we're going to use it a little bit later today. All right, so let's get started. We have two vocabulary words that we're going to be adding into our vocabulary chart this week. We're going to be adding in the word sequence and the word chronological. Both of these words are really good words for us to know for our GED test. And it's important to remember that we see these words in a combination of places. So you're going to see them in your reading test, your science test, and your social studies test. So what do these words actually mean? So we'll start off first by talking about sequence. Sequence is defined as the order in which events or steps occur. So we're really good at picking out sequence. We just usually call it order. So we want to think about something like, what are the things that you do every morning in order to get yourself ready to go for the day? For me, I know that I need to get up, I need to take a shower, I'm going to have breakfast, I'm going to make sure I'm ready for my day, and I usually follow that same sequence of events every day. If things get a little bit off or a little bit tangled, I'm usually a little bit more flustered, I notice, during my day. So we know that sequence is just a series of steps. And it can be steps that you do every day or steps that you do occasionally. Cooking is another great example of something that has to be followed in a sequence. You can't bake your cake unless you have done all of the mixing first. So we see a lot of these real-life examples of what sequence is, and we're usually pretty good at finding it. What we want to remember is that most passages are put in order chronologically. So chronologically just means that something is happening in time. So that means that the events are happening from first event to the last event. If we break down this word, we see two pieces. The first part we see is chrono, and the second part we see is logic. We also have a good ending here, a good suffix with that ly. Chrono is all about time. So anything that deals with time is chrono. And then logic talks all about order. So anytime that we see something talking about order, we can say, oh, it's being done logically. Logically means just that something makes sense and it is in an order that is preferable. So chronological literally means the order of time, meaning that the first event you see is always first, and the last event that you do is always last. So we see this a lot in social studies. Events that happen chronologically go from the oldest event to the newest event. So this is a great word that you're going to see as you do your GED questions. Making sure that you put things in chronological order is the same thing as doing something in a sequence. They both mean the same thing. So the reason why sequence is important is because it helps us see how events relate to one another and how we can achieve certain outcomes. So what I mean by this is that we always want to know why events happen the way they happen. What caused something else to happen? What effect did that event have? Sequence can really help us break down the relationship between events by showing what things came first and what things followed. So it helps us to see how we get to the way things are today or how we get to a certain outcome, say in science. So you're going to want to grab your welcome packet out for me right now. And what I want you to do is look through until you find the page labeled transition words. It should be in the back of your packet after the scientific method reading. So sequence is one of the first places that we are going to start working with transition words. So this idea of transition just means movement or change. So I want you to think for a second of a stoplight. when you come up to a stoplight, you automatically know what you're supposed to do. If the light's green, you know you can continue through. If the light's yellow, depending on who you are, you're either going to slow down or you're going to speed up. And if the light is red, you know that you have to stop. So what we want to talk about is that these lights, we call them signal lights for a reason, because they signal to us what we're supposed to be doing. Transition words work similarly to that. I also call transition words signal words, so I will kind of change in between the two of them. But what we want to keep in mind is that transition words are there to guide us. They're meant to work like traffic signals, that when we see them, we should know instinctively what to do or what the reading is trying to tell us. So I wanted to share this quote for you from the Writing Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, because I think it does a pretty good job of explaining what transition words are and why we need them. So they say that transitions tell readers what to do with the information you present them. Whether single words, quick phrases, or full sentences, they function as signs that tell the reader how to think about, organize, and react to old and new ideas as they read through what you've written. So the idea is that these signal words are meant to be signs for us. They're meant to tell us what's coming next, how an idea is organized, and how I should react to old and new ideas. So how should I categorize those ideas? The main thing to remember, and this is what I would encourage you to write down, is this little sentence down here. Transition words lead the reader from one idea to the next. Their job is to just keep us organized and help us understand what's going on in the text. Now, with transition words, what we want to remember is that these words never change their meaning. So it doesn't matter if you see them in a piece of reading for RLA, if you see them in a piece of science, or if you see them in a piece of social studies, that word, these transition words, are always going to mean the same thing. They're always going to help guide you in the exact same way that a stoplight, no matter where you are, green always means go. So that kind of idea is something that we want to get familiar with. And I really encourage you that the more transition words we add, the more we try to memorize these words, because it's going to make reading so much easier if we can remember what these words do. So we're going to start by looking at sequence transition words. So these transition words of time and sequence help us to explain the order or chronology of a reading to the reader themselves. So what I want you to notice is that I've got two colors of sequence words here. Some that are in orange and some that are in black. The words that are in orange are the words we see most often. That means that these are the words that we see in readings almost every single time that we read. If they're in black, you're going to see them sometimes, but not always. So some of the words that we see a lot are order words. Words like first, second, or third. These are really great sequence words when we're trying to explain to someone else how to do something. So for instance, if I'm trying to explain to someone how to make coffee, I would say first, you need to get the coffee grounds. Second, you need to get the water. Third, you need to put them into the coffee maker. And we can add more words to this. We can know 4th, 5th, 6th, 20th, 100th. Any of these number words work really well for explaining order. We also see words like before, during, and after, or afterwards. Both of these two mean the same thing. They're telling you that something occurs last or after something else. So the idea is that these are good words for helping us understand big order. Before is always a word that we see at the beginning. It signals to us that something is happening first or at the beginning. During is a great word to talk about something in the middle. And then after or afterward is a great word to talk about things at the conclusion or at the end of something. The last couple of words here are all talking about steps and all talking about things that happen in the middle. Words like later and earlier, next, then, and while all tell us as readers that there is something that is going to be following. Next and then are words that we see most often when we're explaining something that has happened and giving extra information. So we can see a combination of these words let's go back to that coffee making example. I might say something like, first, you need to get your coffee. Next, you need to get your water. Then you need to combine those in the coffee pot. So we don't have to be limited to just choosing from one category or the other. We do have a couple of words on here that we may not see very often, but I think it would be good for us to understand what they mean. The first word I wanted to look at is henceforth. Hence is a very old word. We don't really use it anymore. We want to think about it like a word from Shakespeare. Hence means from this point onward. So when we see this word henceforth, what it really means is from this point on. So I might say something like, henceforth, I would like for you to call me the Queen of England. From now on, I want you to refer to me as the Queen of England. Now, I know I really don't want that to happen, but that's what that word henceforth does. It helps tell us that from this point moving forward, I want something to happen. We also have the word simultaneously. Now, this is a word we've probably heard before, but I want to challenge you to think about where you've heard it and how it's used. Simultaneously is a word that tells us that two events are taking place at the exact same time. So I might be able to say something like, I can simultaneously walk, talk, and chew gum. That's the same thing as saying that I can walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time. But it's quicker to say simultaneously than it actually is to say at the same time. It takes less effort, and it's a signal word for us to tell us that these two things are related to one another. We also have another word that I wanted to point out, this word subsequently. Subsequently is a little bit like henceforth, meaning that as a result of everything, the things that follow are ending information. So it's usually used in a way to show that something is ending. So for example, you might be able to say, subsequent to the wedding, there was a large reception. It's just another way to say that at the end or following events. So some of these words are going to be a little more challenging to use, especially things like subsequently, simultaneously, and henceforth. But I want to encourage you to branch out of your comfort zone a little bit and try using some of these words next time you have to talk about order, which is going to be pretty soon. So as a reader, it's really important for us to make sure that we can organize our ideas in a way that we have understanding and we can display our understanding. So one of the ways that we do this is by using graphic organizers. So graphic organizers are going to look different depending on what you're trying to show. So for the next couple of lessons, I'm going to be introducing different graphic organizers for you so that you have multiple ways to explain your information and take notes. So I really like graphic organizers to keep me organized as I read because they are quick forms of note-taking that I can use to make sure that I'm taking away only the key information. So the graphic organizer that we see here is all about sequence. So if you notice, we start off with the first thing, which leads us to the next event, which leads us to the third event, which leads us to the last event. And if you notice, I use different transition words than the words that were given. We know that these can be interchangeable. It's just up to you which one you like to use the best. So as a writer, if I'm taking notes, I would probably write down what my first impressions were of the event. And then as I continued, I would just use my arrows to help me move through the reading. Keep in mind that graphic organizers are just for you. They're just another way of taking notes. And you can do these however you want. So this one is written horizontal, which means left to right. But if you didn't want to write it left to right, you could write one vertically where it's going up and down. That would be fine too. But what I want to encourage you to do is use this format to help you identify sequence as you read. So this is, again, just a great way of taking notes for ourselves. So we're going to look at a couple of examples, and we're going to look at identifying sequence and transition words. So I'm going to switch to my pen so I can do a little bit of writing as we go. So here's our first paragraph. Polar bears are excellent hunters who eat lots of seals. First, they use their sense of smell to find seals. Seals hunt underwater, but must surface to breathe. Then the polar bears wait for the seal to surface for air. They may wait hours for this. Polar bears are very patient hunters. Then, When the seal comes up for air, the polar bear grabs it. Okay, so first thing I'm going to think to myself is, what is the main idea of this passage? Okay, well, I think that the main idea is that this is all about polar bears. Can I be more specific? I think I could be. This is all about how polar bears catch seals. And I think I would say that my first sentence here, I would call my topic sentence, because it is my sentence that states the main idea, that this whole paragraph is about how polar bears hunt seals. I know that this is organized as a sequence for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because I know that there are some good transition words. Words like first and then is actually used twice in this reading. So what this helps me to see is that there are at least 3 steps a polar bear follows to be able to catch seals. And I know because they use this word first, this has definitely got to be number 1. The first thing they do is they use their sense of smell. What do they do after? So they've found the seals through their sense of smell. What do they do? I'm going to come to my next transition word here and say that this is the second thing they do. They wait for the seals to surface for the air. This middle sentence, seals hunt underwater but must surface to breathe, it's good information, but it's not really part of my sequence. It's not part of my order. So far in my sequence, I have that polar bears use their sense of smell to find seals, and then they wait for the seal to surface. What happens after the seal surfaces? Well, I'm going to come back down to my last signal word here and say that this is step number 3. After the seal surfaces, what happens? When the seal comes up for air, the polar bear grabs it. So in this paragraph, this has a sequence in chronological order of 3 events. Number 1, the polar bear uses its sense of smell to find seals. Number 2, the polar bear waits for the seals to surface. And then number 3, once they surface, the polar bear grabs it. So we have 3 steps that the polar bear uses to make sure it catches its food. Now the extra sentences here, and I'm going to change my color so we can show the difference here. This sentence, and this sentence are still necessary for the paragraph. They're still really helpful. But what I need to remember is that they're not showing me sequence. They're not showing me the order of something. They're just really good supporting details. Not every sentence in a paragraph has to fit with the organizational structure. That means that not every paragraph has to have sentences that show sequence when I'm dealing with sequence. So let's do another practice. Here's my second one. Getting to the North Pole is not easy. The fastest way is by airplane. That will only take you to Norway, though. Then you need to take a boat. The boat will take you to an island called Borneo, which is about 60 miles from the North Pole. Then you can fly to the North Pole by helicopter. That's the fastest way to get to the North Pole. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask myself my main idea. What is main idea? I think that this paragraph is all about the North Pole. Can I be more specific? Definitely. I think this is all about how to travel to the North Pole. All of my details here talk to me about a different way or a different path that I need to get to the North Pole. So since this is all about the path that I need to follow to get to the North Pole, I think this is a sequence paragraph. I'm going to look and see if I have any sequence vocabulary words or sequence transition words. And I see then over here, and I also see the word then over here. I don't see any words like first, second, or third, or next, or last. So I really only have 2. But I know that the word then is in the middle. That's a word that tells me that something is in the middle. So these 2 things aren't necessarily the first thing that happens. So as I read through this paragraph, let's see if we can find out the first thing. It first starts off by telling us that the fastest way to get to the North Pole is by airplane that takes you to Norway. So I think this is my first step here, the airplane that gets me to Norway. Even though it doesn't have a transition word, it's still my first step. It's the first thing that I would need to do. So once I've hopped on my airplane to Norway, I see my second transition word right over here, which tells me step 2, then. Okay, so I take my airplane to Norway, then I take a boat to an island called Borneo. So that's my second step. Then I see that my other transition word here to tell me step 3. Then you can fly to the North Pole by helicopter. So what I see is that there are 3 steps to get to the North Pole. Then they're not easy steps. Step number 1 was that I had to take an airplane to Norway. Step number 2 is that I needed to take a boat to Borneo, which is 60 miles from the North Pole. And step number 3 is that I can fly to the North Pole by helicopter. Just like in our paragraph about polar bears, we don't need exactly every single sentence in order to find sequence, but we do need most of them. All right, so let's do one more practice together. Alrighty, so here's my last paragraph for us together. There are strange dancing lights in the Arctic skies. Some call these the northern lights. If you want to see the northern lights, the first thing you have to do is go out at night. You won't see them in the day. Next, you have to get somewhere high. A mountaintop should work. Then you have to wait. If you get lucky and your timing is right, you should see this stunning phenomenon. Good luck! Okay, so let's go ahead and ask ourselves our questions. First question is, what's our main idea? I think that this paragraph is all about the northern lights. Can I be more specific? Yeah, I definitely think so. I think this is all about how to see the northern lights, or the steps I would need to take to see the northern lights. So now that I know that this is talking about order, sequence, and chronological order, I'm going to see if I can find any transition words. And I actually see a couple. I see the word first, I see the word next, and I see the word then. So I've got 3 transition words here to show me the order of something. What I want you to notice with these 3 transition words is that 2 of them are at the beginning of a sentence and 1 is in the middle. Transition words don't always have to appear at the beginning of a sentence. They can appear in the middle. It's just easier to find them when they're at the beginning. So let's talk about the order that we see for this paragraph. The first thing that I see, I'm going to use that transition word first to tell me that this event is number 1. So the first thing that I need to do is make sure I'm going out at night. We've got a sentence here that follows. That doesn't really tell me sequence. It just explains to me why I need to go out at night. I see this word next, which I know tells me something is in the middle. So I think this is a good step 2. Next, you have to get somewhere high, like a mountaintop. Again, we see a sentence that doesn't necessarily add an extra step, but it's a good supporting detail to help explain my information. Lastly, I see this word then. I think this is going to be my step number 3. Then you have to wait. If you get lucky and your timing is right, you should see the stunning phenomenon. So I don't see any more words in here that are telling me that this is a sequence. So this order has 3 steps that I'm following. First, I have to go outside and do it at night because I can't see them during the day. My second step, step 2, next you have to go somewhere high like a mountaintop. And my final step, step 3, is that you have to wait. If you get lucky and your timing is right, you should see it. So this is my 3 steps that were inside of this paragraph. All right, so when we talk about sequence, there are a couple of different pieces or types of sequence. One of them is identifying key steps in a process. So the idea that's really important here is that these are key steps. You can write down every single step of something, but they're not always going to be the most important parts. Remember that when we tackle multiple choice questions, some questions have that word best inside of them that are telling us that you could have more than one option. Key steps works kind of the same way. You can have more steps than the ones that are listed, but what's important is that you find the most important pieces. When we talk about a process is just the movement of events from first to last. These are things like cooking. These are things like mowing the lawn. Gardening is a process. The movement of a butterfly from a caterpillar to a butterfly is a process. We move from the beginning to the end. When we see key steps in a process, these can come like procedural texts. What this means, a procedure This word procedural has the same root word as procedure. It means the steps that you take in order to finish something. So a procedural text just tells you how to do something. So I like to think about them easily as how-to guides. The whole goal of a how-to guide is to get you to understand how to do something by giving you the steps in an easy to understand manner. So usually these include instructions and directions. They are going to describe a step-by-step process so that you are able to understand what you're doing. And what we also notice is that these texts that describe a process, they're usually accompanied by a diagram or a graphic to help you understand what you are reading. So we know diagrams are just visual representations of written information, and graphics are just things like pictures. So I wanted to show you an example of what this would look like. So this is an example that I pulled from a auto repair store. This comes from their blog, and it walks you through the key steps in changing a tire. So when I look at the reading, what I notice is that these are separated into their steps, and that there are 7 steps for me to follow. When I look at my diagram here, I notice that I'm going through 6 of the steps together, meaning that one of the steps just hasn't been followed. So let's look and see which piece of information we find in different places. So step number 1 asks me to loosen the wheel bolts. It says you may need to remove the hubcaps from the wheel beforehand, and then use a wrench to loosen the bolts on the wheels by turning counterclockwise. Do not completely remove the bolts at this point. So let's find where this information is on our graphic. Starting up at the top of my graphic, I see that this is explaining to me how to change a tire. It shows me what tools I need, the car jack, and we've got our wrench. It tells me where everything is located in my trunk, and it actually shows me where I should jack up my car as well. So far, I've not seen any of step number 1. So let's keep going. The first thing I see here is 1, loosen wheel bolts. So this is showing me exactly what I need to be doing. That matches step number 1. So I really like when we see how-to guides that show us visuals, because I like visuals. They help me understand better what the wording is trying to tell me. So this is doing a really good job of explaining to me how to loosen up the wheel bolts. They tell me I need to be going counterclockwise in order to loosen them, and it reminds me that I should not remove them completely. So step number 2 is to raise the car. There are 4 main jacking points on a car, and if you're unsure of the exact points, the owner manual should have them listed. Secure the jack in the proper place and turn the lever clockwise and raise the car until it reaches 6 inches off the ground. Well, if I come back to step number 2 over here, I'm seeing that's exactly what they're telling me. Here's my point where I should be putting the jack, and it's reminding me how I should be using that jack. So it's again a visual representation. Step number 3 is to remove the tires. So now that the car is raised, I can fully remove the tires. Once the bolts are undone, remove the tire by pulling towards yourself. And that's what I see over here in step 3. So what I'm noticing is that they're doing a really good job of giving me the words, the written version of what I should be doing, and matching it with the visual of what I should be doing. Again, we know that visuals are just there to help ensure that we know exactly what's happening. So if my car doesn't look similar to this while I'm doing this process, I know I'm not doing it the right way. All right, step number 4, putting on the spare tire. Take the spare tire and put it in place of the old tire. Secure the bolts enough to keep them in place, but don't fully tighten them. So that's again what I'm seeing here for step 4, and they're telling me that same information again. Step number 5 is to lower the car. Turn the lever on the jack counterclockwise to lower the vehicle. Once on the ground, the jack can be removed from the car. So again, they're showing me the direction I should be moving my lever, and now the car is back on the ground. And then I see step number 6, tighten the wheel bolts. Now that the car has been lowered, you can finish tightening the bolts on the spare tire by turning the wrench clockwise and make sure the tire is completely secured. So notice on my visual here, I'm seeing that clockwise motion, which is different from what they had originally showed me in that counterclockwise. Now on my diagram here, it says that I'm completely done, but we actually had a step number 7 in our how to change a tire. And step number 7 is to replace the tools, which seems like a really good step that I think maybe they should have included here. on our diagram. So what we want to keep in mind is that sometimes it's really easy to find sequence, like in our example here, how to change a tire. Sequence is very clearly showed to us, and we can follow it from steps number 1 through 7. But sometimes we have to do a little bit of digging, and that's where those transition words come in really handy. They help us to be able to dig into the reading a little bit quicker. So I also wanted to give you a heads up that sequence is not something that is just found in reading language arts. It's also seen in social studies and science. And I wanted to show you a little bit of how we see that in science and social studies. So in social studies, for instance, social studies is really one big timeline, which means that events are happening from the first thing in history to the most modern thing in history, meaning that all of social studies is chronological. The events that happen start at the oldest and end with the newest. The job of a timeline is a lot like the job of a diagram. It helps you to visually see that events start at the oldest things and move to the newest things. So timelines can be very large. So this timeline on the left happens to be a short timeline of all of human history, right? We see starting from 1302 BC all the way over to 1918 AD. And just keep in mind, those BC and AD are Latin. They have different meanings, just meaning before common time and after common time. We can also see timelines of one specific event. So this timeline on the right is a timeline of the Battle of Gettysburg, which if we look at our blocks here, go from day 1, day 2, and day 3. So they show us that we're just moving through 3 days in history, but they're explaining to us what happens on each of these 3 days. So social studies, it's really important to find your timelines. And if you don't have a timeline, it's really important to make sure that your years, dates, and time are also in order. Year, date, and time are also good transition phrases for us to use for sequence. They're really good for helping us identify when events happened. Now for science, one of the key things for science for sequence is the scientific method. Now the scientific method is just a series of steps that we use in science to help us answer questions or solve problems. So we're going to be doing a lesson next week that digs a little deeper into the scientific method, so I'm not going to go too in-depth with it here, but I just want you to kind of familiarize yourselves with what some of these words mean. Ask yourself if you've seen them before. If you have, where? And if you haven't, be prepared to see more of them and look for good definitions. So what we're seeing is that in both science and social studies, we have a lot of sequence. So I just want to remind you that for sequence, it's really important to be a close, careful reader and make sure that you are keeping track of your transition words. So for our homework this week, we are going to be practicing identifying sequence in different types of readings. Some of them are going to be procedural, so you're going to see some how-to instructions, and some of them are just going to be close readings where we may have to dig a little bit more. So our homework this week on Monday is to review some vocabulary words on Quizlet. I really recommend you go check these words out because we have 2 words in the vocabulary list that are vocabulary words that you need to know for your GED test, so I highly recommend you at least check them out. On Tuesday, we have a reading skill practice. The practice is going to be identifying and understanding sequence. You're going to have 2 readings that deal with sequence, and it's up to you to answer questions about the order that you see and how sequence is used. On Wednesday, we have our second part of our fragments and complete sentences. If you finished last week's and you were having a little bit of a hard time, reach out to me so we can do some practice together. The idea is that we should be able to tell the difference between what a fragment and a complete sentence is by the end of our homework assignment for Wednesday. Thursday's lesson is a science reading. We're going to be doing a close reading of the article called How Did Scientists Calculate the Age of the Earth? And what I would really love for you to do is to be looking out for sequence. There is order in this reading. It's up to you to kind of find that order though. And then on Friday, we have another graph practice. We're going to be doing our first circle graph with 10 questions. Remember that when you finish your graph, check back on the feedback so that you can watch the video of how I solved my problems there. The last thing that I want to remind you of is that I can start giving you all credit for watching this video. So what I would like for you to do, once you have finished this video all the way through, I would like for you to go into Google Classroom under the lesson for today. It's going to be called This Week's Lesson Link. What I would like for you to do is just make sure you click the Turn In button if you have watched this video. I know that some of you are attending Zoom lessons and some of you are only watching the video. So if you watch the video, make sure you put your name in there for turned in. That way I know that you have done it and I can give you the credit for it. All right, everyone, as always, if you have any questions or concerns, or if you just want to chat about something, let me know. Send me a message. You can reach me on Remind, on my email, or by phone. Good luck, and let me know if you need any help. Have a great week.